Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of Deciphered, the podcast where we cut through the BS and get to the heart of the issues when it comes to global affairs. And obviously, the big news today is all coming out of Iran and the US. So, Jeremy, my name is Mohanad. I always forget to introduce myself. My name is Mohanad. This is my co-host, Jeremy. Jeremy, why don't you catch people up on what's been happening the last 2 days with the peace negotiations between the US and Iran?
Yeah, and Mohammed, and it's kind of you want to use the word funny, but it's not really funny what we're talking about, right? But it really seemed like Trump did not want to go back to war with Iran. He seemed to understand that this was not working out well for him, and he appeared to be looking for every excuse not to go back to war and to find some sort of face-saving measure because Iran has strategically won this war. This is like the end goal of the neoconservative dream, going back to the early 2000s, right after 9/11, as the neoconservatives really take sort of control almost of US foreign policy or become a dominant voice in US foreign policy, was to eliminate Iran as the final major power blocking US hegemony over North Africa and West Asia. And Iran stood up to the United States and Israel and probably the UAE at war, withstood tremendous sort of onslaught of all the top tech the US has to wreak havoc militarily on any country in the world, and managed to, in response, destroy all the US military bases surrounding Iran to pummel Israel. We don't even know to what extent because of the strong censorship regime there, but significantly to hit and destroy Gulf states significantly, particularly the ones that are most hostile towards Iran, such as the UAE. So the United States was stuck, right? There appeared to be no single way, and Trump was hearing this, for the US to win this war militarily, barring maybe a call up of 1 million troops. You need a draft in the US to actually raise that army. I don't know how the United States could pay for it. The United States is hitting record levels of debt. Printing money might not be as easy as it used to be. To even rebuild the munitions needed to attack Iran, they need rare earths from China that China wasn't willing to give them. Like, United States appeared cornered, and even though there was so much messaging going on that an attack appeared imminent, the US had all these assets in the region to attack Iran again with maybe one more huge hit, hoping that would lead to something. Trump did seem to be, and I don't know if you feel that way, looking for any off ramp he could. And we seem to have that off ramp now. It appears to be like a 30-day to 60-day pause in the conflict. There seems to be a memorandum of understanding where some measures will be adopted by each side, such as limited or full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, some release of Iranian assets, frozen funds overseas, as a confidence building measure towards a full deal between the United States and Iran. But it appears like the United States backed down. No question, the United States didn't want to go to war during Hajj. Saudi Arabia was probably telling them, we don't want this war taking place during Hajj, which is happening soon. And then the World Cup. The United States wants to be, Trump likes these spectacles, and for him, like having the distraction of the Iran war during the World Cup. And now it seems like the United States is also focusing on easier targets in the Americas, such as Cuba. We saw posts about Greenland over the weekend. We have to remember Alberta, where you are based, actually has a move towards sovereignty right now. They'll have a first vote in October, I think, on it, right? It's whether or not to have a proper sovereignty vote. The United States is watching that with interest. So there seems to be a shift away from the Middle East towards the Americas. Appears to be what's happening.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to go like a step further. It's not just about the World Cup and the Hajj and all of these things. I think the call with the Arab leaders and leaders of
Yeah.
other countries around the region, like Turkey, I think the message from them to Trump yesterday, and has been for quite some time, is if you go back into this war, you basically have two options, man. You either hit them again, like the way that you did the first, however many days it was, it
About
started on
40, yeah.
February 28th, 40 or so, which is not going to do anything. You didn't move them, hitting them like you did before. So what's the point of that other than prolonging the economic pain for the region and for the world? Or you're going to go actually all out and try to quote unquote wipe them off the face of the earth, as he's threatened to do many times. But I think the message they were telling him is like, well, if you do that second option, I suppose that's a way to get them to surrender if they no longer exist. But guess what? You're going to kill us all with that action too, because they're not going to just go quietly into the night. They're going to blow up our entire economic infrastructure here. They're going to blow up our energy grids. They're going to just destroy everything. And that's not good for us, or good for you, or good for anyone. Except, of course, Israel would be the one that would be happy with that scenario. There's no good options in front of him. So I think that was the big mover for him. Now, we can't underestimate now what the Israelis can do to ruin this memorandum of understanding that's not signed yet. Now, the question becomes for most people is why is any of this happening in the first place? Right. And this is what I mean about our podcast is going to cut through the BS, because all you've heard is nonstop. This is about Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. If I hear Trump or the EU or Israel say that one more time, like we've heard that so many times, it's ridiculous. But guess what? For everyone who wants to actually know the reality, that's not what this is about at all. First of all, let's, you know what? Let's be generous and let's say Iran was working towards creating a nuclear weapon. Why would Iran want a nuclear weapon? It wouldn't be because of the hysteria that is circulated in Western media about them just being, nihilists who want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth and possibly even target the US, Canada, and Europe. We've heard this talk for decades now, and it is all just absolute rubbish. Iran would never do that. Even if it had a nuclear weapon, it would never do it that way because it would mean their end. I mean, they would be destroyed in no time by Western powers. It would actually be the end of their civilization. They just would never do it. They're not irrational actors, despite what you hear about them in Western media. And we're going to do a whole episode about our own critiques of the Iranian regime and how we can sort of advance that critique without falling into imperial designs, right? But they're not irrational. And the reason Iran would have wanted a nuclear weapon is for one reason only, to deter the US from doing what it just did. And to deter Israel as well, of course, of doing what it just did, which is attack it, try to weaken it, right? The US does not want the countries in the region to be sovereign and free. For all the talk about sovereignty and freedom and democracy that the US spews across the world. This is what they want to do. It's all BS. They don't want democratic, free, sovereign people everywhere. They want people who are subdued to their power, who do things for the benefit of the US and American economic elites, not for the benefit of those people. What people want across the world is sovereignty and freedom. It's the most basic human desire that people have, right? And Iran wants to maintain that, and so they don't want to bow down to the U.S. So they thought a nuclear weapon would be a good way to achieve that. But what they've discovered in this war, they don't even need a nuclear weapon. Their real nuclear option has been economic disruption, and so this U.S.-Israel reckless war, not to mention illegal and immoral and all of these things. It has led to Iran discovering that, guess what? We actually can bring the US to the negotiating table where we maintain our sovereignty by just putting economic pressure on them. And that's the message that's going out to the rest of the world today. But yeah, I mean, Jeremy, where do you see things going now that we are where we are?
Well, it's difficult to tell because the Trump administration, of course, sort of put us on this path. We're on Muhammad, right, in the Middle East when we think about it. It's been a very friendly administration towards Israel. And in many ways, you can see at the beginning of this war, right, Marco Rubio, other Trump administration officials said that they started this war on behalf of Israel. Like, I always wonder if there's not some scapegoating there going on, because there is also a bigger picture here where I think you have the broader neoconservative movement seeks to achieve American hegemony over the world. And this is what you're describing, where it doesn't matter that Zelensky is not actually anymore elected, that this is a dictatorship now, that they just want pliant states that work within the sort of the pecking order of the Western bloc, right? And maybe now it's just directly the United States, because the United States is losing interest in its Western bloc other than maybe serving American interests, right? But there's maybe some hope, right, that if you take out Iran, then you can limit China's resources, like access to oil resources, and limit China's growth. This is a big priority. This is a major priority for the security establishment in the United States, is weakening China, because China is advancing so much further ahead than the United States technologically, organizationally, and in manufacturing, and no question militarily in the near future. But so there's maybe some like scapegoating there going on, right, of Israel. There's this bigger strategy going on in the United States. But no question, for the Israelis, they wanted to have a weaker state in Iran. They have had a lot of influence over really neoconservative foreign policy of the Trump administration, despite campaigning specifically against neoconservatives and against wars in the Middle East back to 2016. Much like Obama, Trump immediately went to war in the Middle East in different ways. And his first real major wars have let's forget what was going on in Venezuela because it happened so quickly. What Trump called the excursion in the Middle East, this brief war he wanted in Iran, has turned into a significant quagmire and brought the United States back deeply into the Middle East. Now, it's hard to imagine with Trump still having more than 2 years left, will he just leave Iran alone, right? That's the real question. So Iran is probably going to use this time to develop its capabilities further. And from a military perspective, it has fought a pretty successful war. It hit more US planes than any time since the Vietnam War. And in that case, the Vietnamese, if I'm not mistaken, had significant foreign support, relatively significant foreign support. And it seems like Iran actually developed a lot of its systems, air defense systems on its own, maybe had some support from China and Russia, but developed a lot of indigenous platforms to fight back against the United States. It seems like Iran will probably use this time to strengthen itself further. And I agree with you 100%. Strait of Hormuz. If you're living in Killaloe, Ontario, you're not going to be worried about Iran getting a nuclear weapon, Mohammed, even in Calgary. What you're going to worry about is Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz and blocking energy reserves from getting out, fertilizer from getting out, helium from getting out, all these essential components to the global economy, to global supply chains, because that raises costs. That causes economic recession. We were looking at an economic depression, or we are if we go back to war, right? It's not just recession, it's depression. Can you imagine what that's going to mean for global stability? There's something like 80 countries already that have implemented emergency measures to deal with the shock in energy prices. We've had one of the biggest shocks in energy prices ever, including a lack of supply, just an outright lack of supply. Even the costs don't necessarily reflect that lack of supply in regions.
Absolutely.
I don't know how you feel. Like, what do you think we're going for?
Yeah,
Are we
no,
going to go
no,
straight back to war? Or?
I totally agree with you, first of all, on that last point. And it's not just gas prices, food prices. We, like
Yeah.
Canadians, have not felt that yet. But it's coming down the pipeline. I mean, the experts on food distribution and economics around food and all of that are saying, the hike up in prices of food is coming sometime in the fall. And the longer all of this blockades and closures keep happening, fertilizers are not being moving into markets. The longer this happens, the more guaranteed that there's going to be a spike in the price of food everywhere around the world, and the more severe that spike will be, right? Like, and it's going to have serious consequences for people in a whole host of ways that people are not really seeing. And it was all to quote unquote, protect people from nuclear weapons that were never being developed, and even if they were, they would never be fired. They were just going to be used for deterrence. And so at the end of the day, it's going to be regular people that pay the price for wars that are driven for the interests of elites. Largely economic elites in places like the US and Europe and Canada, and that the Israeli state wants to do. Now, so the question now becomes, so where are we headed? And you always have to go back to Israel when you're talking about wars in the Middle East. Israel is at the root cause of all of them, essentially. And why do I say that? Israel's existence in the region goes back to 1948 when they established themselves by expelling the indigenous Palestinians inhabitants, right? Like, so they come in and they cause all this great suffering for the Palestinian people. And that wound is still at the heart of the entire region, in the hearts and minds of people everywhere around the region. And Israel has always known that it will not be simply, welcomed with open arms by everyone in the region, precisely because they committed a great crime to become a presence, an entity in the region. And that great crime is ongoing. It didn't just happen once in 1948. It actually started before that, and it continues on till today. We saw it, of course, expand in the genocide since 2023, the genocide that is still ongoing. And so it's because Israel can only exist through this, enormous violence of genocide that people in the region resist it. That's the whole story, right? They don't resist it because they hate it as a democracy, quote unquote, or because they hate Jews or any of it's a religious war. None of this nonsense that you hear about in the West. People resist Israel because it wants to commit genocide against the Palestinians and take even more Arab lands in Syria and Lebanon and elsewhere. You have these greater Israel people that are talking about taking lands from Iraq and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and so on. So Iran has always stood as one of the last states, not militias, not non-governmental sort of groups, um, um, but as a state that still speaks up against Israeli aggression and resists it. They refuse to go along with this U.S.-Israeli order in the region. And the U.S.'s interest, you absolutely nailed it there. It's about their hegemony, and they think the region is important for their control over energy markets. If they have that, they can defeat any rival superpower, namely, they're thinking about China and Russia. And so that's their whole goal of this thing as well. Now, Israel, because it views Iran as that last standing state standing in its way, and its vision of complete military supremacy in the region. Nobody will mess with it. Nobody will come to the sort of rescue of the Palestinians. Nobody will speak up for the Palestinians. People will just accept that the Palestinian question is gone. They're no longer like a political entity. They want Iran gone. And Israel doesn't care if Iran is replaced with whatever government. They prefer an Iran that is just like, if it falls apart into chaos and endless civil war, they don't care. They'll just let that happen.
I think that's the preference, Mohammed, if we look at its recent patterns.
100%. 100%. And so they're
For
going
the
to
Israeli side.
Absolutely. And right now, they're going to try to do everything to bring the U.S. Off of this, like away from signing this MOU or any kind of peace deal with Iran and back to a full-on war. Like I said at the beginning, the only country that would be happy with total chaos and destruction, not just in Iran, but even in the Gulf states, they don't care. Israel doesn't give a damn. If the Gulf states are burning, that's to them, that's even better for them, actually. Weaker countries around them is better for them. That's their thinking.
And they want to divert oil pipelines maybe towards Israel. So that's
exactly
one of the hopes, that where the Saudis have that pipeline on the Red Sea, maybe if they could build one up towards Israel, and Israel would guarantee that that oil gets shipped further west. That's one of the hopes that Israel's something that Israel's aspiring towards coming out of this conflict, right?
100%. 100%. And just sorry, I just want to finish with this, because now what this means is that what Israel views as in its self-interest is against the self-interest of pretty much everyone in the region except the UAE. We could do a whole show in the UAE why the hell they think they're doing the right thing by putting all their eggs in the basket of the US and Israel and selling out everyone in the region. But it's only in their interest, not in the interest of anyone else in the region. It's also not in the interest of ordinary people in Europe, Canada, or the US. Guess what? Those ordinary people are the ones going to be paying the price for wars. They're going to be sending their kids to war and dying. They're going to be paying higher food prices and higher gas prices and so on and so forth. It's only the economic elites in some of those countries and Israel that are happy with war and destruction. And so people have to kind of make up their minds on which side of history they want to be on. And Israel is now going to do everything it can to ruin this peace deal, this MOU, and drive everything back into war. And they're going to try to do it mostly through a continued escalation in Gaza and in Lebanon.
And just holding that thought, thinking of the guests we're going to speak to, Mohammed, I just want to note too that the Abraham Accords, the whole project that Israel has been working on with the Trump administration since like 2016, 2017 is really in jeopardy. And that Abraham Accords was predicated on the idea of the normalization of Israel with Arab states through the explicit erasure of Palestinians. And we've been seeing that come undone and leading to great instability in the region. So the UAE is the main partner in the Abraham Accords, very close to Israel. And they have been attacked much more than they did, it seems, support this war against Iran, much more than other states, and have really been devastated. So from a UAE security perspective, actually, the Abraham Accords have created the kind of instability for the Gulf and for the UAE that the UAE itself has been partnering with Israel to carry out in countries across the region, from Sudan to Libya to Syria. So but we have this project now in real jeopardy. So for them, for the not just the Israel on the ground in Gaza and Lebanon, but their allies in the United States, right? So there's a whole think tank class, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, democracies, politicians like Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, media personalities like John Bolton. They're going to be doing their best, and many people behind the scenes, their best to undermine this MOU. And this is at the same time, as you mentioned, this is the war absolutely nobody in the world wants. Regional powers have really stepped up and said, we don't want this. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, who are themselves concerned about Israeli and UAE intentions. They don't want this war. It reminds me of this old Mad TV sketch. I think it's Mad TV. I don't if anybody's seen it. We should maybe
Man, you're
retweet it or
going way
something.
back now,
Yeah,
way
but
back.
but these thoughts have gone back to in the mid 2000s. There was a sketch where let's not get into details. But it was a sketch against the Iraq War, and this is the beginning, sort of this neoconservative agenda of destroying many countries in the Middle East that were post-Soviet countries that were resisting the United States sort of imperial hegemony. And Iraq War had gone so badly, and all the public in the United States already knew by the mid 2000s, and the whole sketch was against the Iraq War. And then towards the end of the sketch, they're like, "No, let's not go to war with Iran." So there's that angst already back then. And if nobody wants this war, it's a war that nobody wants, right? But for, like you
Except for
said, a small class of people who,
yeah,
for ideological and personal financial reasons,
yeah.
in the military-industrial complex, amongst elites, and in the pro-Israel lobby that want this war. And I think what we'll see is Israel and its allies in that lobby will do its best to undermine any sort of peace deal with Iran, especially because Iran has asserted itself as a major power in the region. And rather than weakening it, Iran looks much stronger globally.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't ever underestimate Israel's ability to bring the region back into war. Even if this MOU is signed, even if we are moving into that direction, don't underestimate their ability to kind of sow chaos and instability in the region because again, they have associated that with their strategic interests. This is not some kind of conspiracy. I don't want to hear none of this nonsense about like, oh, blaming Israel for everything. Well, it's a fact. They benefit. They want weaker states around them. They want vassal states around them. They want chaotic states around them. Weak and divided and mired in civil war, and they view that in their strategic interests. So maybe if you view something like that as in your strategic interest, maybe the problem is you. But of course, I'm not counting on, and I'm not waiting on Israel to come to that realization. But the whole world needs to come to that realization and starts to take serious material actions against Israel to stop them. Um, but as I mentioned earlier, one of the ways that they're going to try to, ruin any kind of deal with Iran is through their continued aggression in Lebanon. And earlier this week, we had the pleasure of speaking with Sami Hermez, who is a professor in Qatar and knows a lot about what's going on in Lebanon. So Jeremy will visit our chat with him next, and it will enlighten people about what is happening in Lebanon and where things might be going.
So we can get a sense if Lebanon could be used as one of those levers, Mohammed, to undermine peace in the region, because Iran has been pretty insistent that any peace deal will include Lebanon.
Yeah, we're so happy that you're coming on, Sami. Sami Hermez is a professor of anthropology at Northwestern University in Qatar. He's the author of two books, War is Coming, Between Past and Future, Violence in Lebanon, and his latest book is My Brother, My Land, a story from Palestine. Welcome to Deciphered, Sami. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Sami, just to start, can you describe and explain the current dynamics between the Lebanese government and Hezbollah? What's happening there? Where are things going?
Yeah, I mean it's a big question to be honest. I think in general this government has been really antagonistic towards Hezbollah as you can see. I think the big thing was on March 2nd once the war between Israel and Hezbollah sort of kicked off again. The government banned Hezbollah as a sort of military, as a resistance and whatnot. And so it's kind of going after it. But I think maybe if we wanted to look at this with a little bit more nuance, might be useful to actually think of this as kind of not government versus Hezbollah, but two parties, like two. I mean, maybe for Canadian viewers, you think of like conservatives and liberals, right? And you have right now the anti-Hezbollah, pro-US, uh, you know, constellation of parties. It's not one party, but that are in government. And what the difference, though, again, to use that kind of comparison, is that in Canada or the US, Democrats, Republican, you tend to have a united foreign policy. So regardless of, the conservatives, they're not going to come to power and say, we're going to align with Russia. Or when Trump makes some kind of, Canada is going to be the 51st state comments, you don't have conservatives allying with the Americans against the liberals, for example, Liberal Party. Whereas in Lebanon, you don't have that unified foreign policy. So you have a case where there's one side, the government today, that's allied with the US and essentially allied with Israel, although they won't come out and say it, right? Against another side that wants to resist settler colonialism. And so you get into all the sort of details of what is Hezbollah as a party and the sort of attacks left and right. But essentially, that's sort of what you have at the moment. And so you have the government trying to going into negotiations with no leverage. I mean, Hezbollah is the leverage, but they're distancing themselves from the leverage and leaving Hezbollah out to dry, which is your sort of, your essentially your weapons because you don't have an army as the Lebanese government, and going to these negotiations. And funnily enough, I don't know how much people know, but Trump was trying to get the president of Lebanon to meet Netanyahu. And it's kind of funny because actually, if you come to think of it, the UAE MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, has not met with Netanyahu. And they're completely, in cahoots, normalization, whatnot. And so we kind of just want to skip everything. So there's a lot of, I think, and I think maybe the last thing I'd want to say on this is that the general relationship has been one, even since like 2006. There's been a kind of, I don't know if I want to call it a strategy, but essentially like strength through our weakness, that our division can actually be used as strength. So I'll give the government the sort of benefit of the doubt to say, well, we need to distance ourselves from Hezbollah because we can't, because otherwise the whole country will be sacrificed, right? Like Israel will just carpet bomb the whole country. And so, the South, we've sort of kind of given it on a silver platter, but there's this recognition that the South is going to sacrifice. But at least maybe we can save the rest of the country. So we'll distance ourselves from Hezbollah. But in this latest round, it's sort of crossed the red line, I think, where you're stepping into all sorts of dangerous territory, and allying yourselves with Israeli interests, completely, yeah, it's just complete. Sort of the interests have been sort of entangled between the government and the Lebanese government and the Israeli government.
Right, right. Yeah, that's super helpful, Sami. And okay, so building on that. So Israel wants basically vassal states all across the Middle East. They want states that just are subdued, get down on their knees, do what Israel says to do, forget the Palestinian cause, let go of the idea of even a fake Palestinian state and so on. But if they can't get a vassal state, they want states around the Middle East to be, chaotic states, unstable, fighting in civil wars, fragmented, maybe even, dividing up into multiple small states, whatever. They don't care. As long as they're fighting with each other, they're not opposing Israel. And that's clearly their strategy in Lebanon. They don't care about the Lebanese people. They don't care about stability. They don't care about security or economic stability for Lebanese people. They just want Lebanon to be fighting a civil war if they don't form a vassal state that coalesces around obedience to Israel. So, which political forces inside Lebanon see this strategy in clear ways? And are there some who don't? Like, does the government understand that Israel is driving them towards a civil war?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do think that there's some level of insanity like that you just, absurdity that you don't understand. I think there are groups, I think, in government that are governed by a sense of wishful thinking. That maybe if we don't resist, that Israel will leave us alone, right? And I don't know on what historical basis they rely upon, but I think that's what wishful thinking does, is that really like you're so defeated and weak that your last straw is to hang on not onto resistance because you see what happens, right? And if you're not invested in certain ways, then the destruction and the death count become the the prism with which you see the world, right? And of course, if you're that's the prism, then resistance is always going to be not the thing that you want to do because resistance inevitably means you are resisting a stronger power that has the capacity to destroy you in any context anywhere in the world, right? So if destruction and material damage is your lens, then yeah, I mean, you're obviously going to run. And so I think that leaves people sort of at a loss. And so they still have this wishful thinking. And that's one part of this answer. The other part of this answer is that you do have groups that are, I'd say, for example, the Lebanese forces might be one of those groups that do have a vision of Lebanon, also historically, that's more in alliance with Israel, that we can maybe have some kind of rapprochement, and then and there's some sort of anti-Muslim thing going on there that like then maybe we can rule over the Muslims. And I think if you look at historically again, when Lebanon was created, it was created in this sort of greater Lebanon um, geography, meaning that historically Lebanon is the mountains, Mount Lebanon, right? And then in the Ottoman empires, you had the Mutasarrifiyya of Lebanon. So you had this like small mountain range. And the Maronites, pre-independence, they argued that a Lebanon that's small would not be economically viable. So we need a greater Lebanon. It's an economic project, essentially. And I think they thought that they could rule over the people this would encompass, namely the Muslims of different sects. But obviously, that hasn't been the case. And so I think there is also a sense ideologically that maybe we need to retreat. We need to create a smaller Lebanon, right? And that materializes in sort of calls for federalism, for example. So just trying to figure out, and that can be either an end or it could be code for, federalism, then you sort of detach completely. And so there is like a sense of this retreat, and the land that you essentially would give away would be the south. Maybe Israel takes that, right? So there is also a sense of, well, we don't, there again, the kind of colliding interests between Israel and certain groups that at some point in the wars in the 1970s and 80s, the Lebanese forces, they aligned themselves with Israel militarily, but now things are different. So then they do it in different ways, right? Rhetorically, you distance on one hand, and you sort of blame Hezbollah for it all, and of course, um, yeah. I think the other part of this is that you have a media that is all sort of become aligned in one direction, and so that also moves the story in a certain way and moves the narrative in a certain way. So I think people will recognize if you ask anyone, like, well, Israel wants this. Like, this is what Israel want. They want chaos. They'll tell you, yeah, we know, but either what can we do? We have to try this. We haven't tried the way of, I don't know, quote unquote, peace or whatnot. We haven't tried to give up our resistance and the weapons. And so they come up with all these kind of things. Not they won't tell you, oh no, Israel. No one's going to say, oh, Israel is cool and we love Israel. Most, I think, 99%. There are people who obviously think that, but 99% would say that, this is a beast, and we basically have to learn how to live with the beast, how to live with the bully. And of course, anyone who has done any work on bullies, your high school bully, that's not how you deal with bullies, is not right. So to just kind of cower,
You're
you just
encouraging more bullying. The more you cower, the more bullying
e-
happens. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And Sami, I'm just wondering, like, who like for everybody listening, who the bullies really are in this case. And what I'm going to do is maybe structure this as a two-part question, because this is one point that keeps being brought up a lot in the West, right? That Hezbollah is an actor, a terrorist organization, serving almost the interests of Iran in Lebanon. To what extent is that true? And then even maybe I'm going to ask that question first. To what extent is that even true? To what extent is Hezbollah independent? What is the structure of the conflict between Israel and Lebanon versus, let's say, the bigger war against Iran? And we might get into another question there about the goals of the actors in the Iran war. But just think about Lebanon first.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's a way that we talk about um, US allies, but Iranian proxies, right?
Yeah.
So and it's not just Iran. Essentially, like our enemies, meaning I don't know, Canada's enemies in your context or America's enemies. Our enemies have proxies. We have allies, right? So the Gulf states are our allies. Israel is our ally. Speaking as an American, right? Whereas Hezbollah can only be a proxy. It can't have agency. I think ideologically, Hezbollah is very much connected ideologically with Iran, but they are not just a Lebanese group, but I think they are a group that is fighting for liberation of their land. They emerge ideologically out of a religious Shia doctrine or like sort of beliefs, um, and they are their thinking is transnational, if you will. But that also has a way of being seen as a negative, because the other side is seen as, caring about Lebanon first, or wanting the strength to strengthen the state. But the other side is also very much tied transnationally through sort of forms of global capitalism, right? In the sense that their alliance, who are their allies, right? How are they thinking? What sort of influences do they want, right? So I don't, this idea that one side is like the big bad, right? Hezbollah is a big bad guy in Lebanese politics, and the other side are, poor victims is a skewed way of seeing things. And I don't want to get into like sort of the internal affairs, because internally Hezbollah has been problematic, but it's problematic as one amongst various allies, right? And so you get into the situation where if it rains tomorrow, it's Hezbollah's fault, right? So everything becomes Hezbollah's fault, and it's a way for all the other political parties to kind of skirts their own complicity in, for example, the financial crisis and the sectarian system, and the fact that we don't have any kind of working state services or anything like that. So I think again, it's just very easy to paint our enemies as terrorists and the big sort of big bad guys. Um, but ultimately, I think we need to understand what the Zionist project is doing in the Levant, right? In Palestine and Syria and Lebanon, and I think even further in Jordan we can talk about. And I mean, we see what happened in the last few months, that the war came crawling to the doorsteps of Gulf countries, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And actually, speaking of that, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the Gulf countries' reactions to the war on Iran. but also, what do you think the Gulf countries will do? Israel says we're going to colonize southern Lebanon. We're gonna go up to at least the Litani River. They're operationalizing that as we speak. They're not backing down on it. Do you think the Gulf countries are going to draw a line here? Or is it going to be more of the same, where, just like they've accepted the colonization of the overwhelming majority of Palestine, they're going to now accept the colonization of parts of Lebanon and parts of Syria and try to live with the beast, as you were saying earlier? Or, where do you see the Gulf moving in general?
Hannah, it really boggles the mind. I think trying to understand, I think, I don't know, poker or one of these games must really explain a lot in the sense that, like, when you bet and you're sort of all in, and then someone says, raises you, and then you kind of just need to put in more. And so I think that's where the Gulf countries sort of find themselves. And in that sense, I think, unfortunately, you will see more of the same in the sense that, you might see condemnation, but that doesn't really amount to much, right? The Arab countries collectively, I mean, even not just the Arab countries, the Muslim countries, I think the world in general, right? Like, nobody is coming to the aid, right? And the most you get, we clap because Spain, the Prime Minister of Spain stands up and says a few nice words, and all of a sudden is like a bit pro-Palestinian, and like we hang on to that hope. But it's all words, right? Nobody is. The Gulf countries are still, not really materially changing their politics. Forget on the US, but like just in general on Israel, right? And I think we've entered a new phase in warfare that is really dangerous in the sense that we have this new thing called a ceasefire, which is not really a ceasefire. So what's really interesting is that since April 17 in Lebanon, uh, Israel has not uh, conducted, how should I put this, has not conducted a single or has not engaged in any violations of the ceasefire. And I think that might sound bizarre to some of your listeners, but since April 17, Israel has not violated the ceasefire. And the reason is that the ceasefire allows Israel to fire at will. So it's violated international laws of war by killing God knows how many medics, and there's, like, I'd say, a medicide in the south of Lebanon, but it hasn't violated the ceasefire because the ceasefire actually says that it can attack at will. And so, but we are in a world right now where, who talks about Gaza anymore because there's a ceasefire. There are people dying and being bombed in Gaza every day, and the genocide continues. And I think the scary thing is that this is a new reality, and thankfully Hezbollah is fighting back this time. And the first 15 months, it sat there and waited, and I guess the thinking was, let's see where this process takes us, and maybe consolidating and so on and so forth, and because they were hit hard. But now they're, attacking, but it's a ceasefire because I'm gonna go down to Lebanon in the summer, and in Beirut in the north, the party continues. It's quite sick. But that's really what the ceasefire is about, is leave the rest of the country aside. And for some groups in the country, that's fine, right? Politically, ideologically, let's sever the South. So
Sami,
yeah.
I'm trying to sort of even if we can simplify things for our listeners a little bit. We're hearing this catchphrase often that is since October 7th of 2023 that Israel has a right to defend itself, right? And the sort of the idea, many ideas associated with this term terminology includes that sort of whatever Israel does is necessary because it's a defensive measure, and it creates this idea that Israel is being attacked unprovoked. And this is sort of the idea of October 7th. And this is where Hezbollah comes in. You have a lot of people asking, why would Hezbollah involve itself by attacking Israel? How would it bring this upon Lebanon? And now Israel needs to act in this way. Now, how do you respond to these sort of ideas? And it permeates, I would say, Western media and a lot of what we say in academia, the creation of knowledge, right? Which is really a lot of the thought around amongst Western analysts, let's say, when they look at Lebanon and Israel and try to understand what's taking place. So this idea that really Hezbollah just keeps attacking Israel and Israel needs to act.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is the way that things get set up is that there's this as if that before October 7 there was peace between um, Israel and Hezbollah, right? Or Israel and Lebanon. And that as if prior to October 7 there weren't daily, I think almost daily, violations of Lebanese territory, airspace, land that was occupied. And so, if Israel wanted peace with Lebanon and wanted to sort of end this, they would have just completely left Lebanon in 2000, not remained with some pieces of land and whatnot. But so what happens is there becomes again like the ceasefire, right? There's this overall narrative, right? That then if Hezbollah breaks that, it's seen as the party that is violating, right? Now, October 8 was maybe strategically, Hassan Nasrallah felt that the Lebanese needed to, or Hezbollah needed to come to the aid of Gaza, that it could not sit on the sidelines. There are all kinds of reasons for why it needed to choose that moment. Again, the reason why it chooses March 1st or 2nd to attack Israel is because Khamenei was killed, and so it's retaliation. These are reasons for the escalation of uh, of a situation that is not peace, right? Of a situation that is occupation, that is settler colonialism, and so on. And I think the problem, of course, is, I mean, Israel doesn't have a right neither to defend itself or to exist. And so I mean that's also part of the larger issue of how we understand that. What does Israel have a right to exist as an apartheid state? Does it have a right to exist as a settler colony? And right to exist, not to resist, right to exist as an apartheid state. So, and if the situation of apartheid, if that sort of beginning situation is wrong and unjust, then there's a need to resist that situation, right? And Israel can't claim to defend apartheid. Essentially, that's what's defending, right? And so, I'm of the opinion that even if Israel is not occupying Lebanon, there is a duty of Lebanese, of Jordanians, of Americans, of Canadians to liberate Palestine and to end an apartheid situation, right? And Israel doesn't have the right to defend that. So there's all kinds of, I mean, we can approach this from different perspectives, but even just the basic international law and forget morality aside, on the basis of international law, Israel is occupying, is violating, right? So because my response to you could be, okay, so since Israel had violated Lebanese airspace from 2006 to 2023, I don't know how many thousand times, should Hezbollah have lobbed rockets after every one of those violations, right? Should have Hezbollah have sent a drone to just surveil Israel in every one of those violations. And of course, those same people are going to say, no, of course not, right? But that would be defending itself. Hezbollah didn't do that. It chose to attack on October 8th because the situation was no longer tenable and it had
So,
to.
so something that might seem confusing to people too is that there's an impression that Iran is controlling Hezbollah, including a lot of folks in Lebanon believe this, and I think say that are opposed to Hezbollah. Is that true? Like, would they be directing Hezbollah to attack Israel on their behalf since some time now?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's a good question. And I think, again, this goes back to the idea of alliance, right? And that I think, there are accounts also that suggest that it was Hezbollah, for example, that pushed Khamenei to enter Syria, right? Not the other way around, right?
Syria,
So,
when would that be? Sorry, just to clarify for
and in
everybody.
2012, 2013,
So
right?
after
So
the civil war got
the
underway.
uprising, so in the uprisings in the Arab Spring, right? Then
Hmm.
there was this, right, the war, and the Iranians came in on the side of Assad, and Nasrallah was there are, again, these are different accounts, but my point here is that in an alliance, things can go in either direction. And I think, Hezbollah is a homegrown resistance that needs a foreign power to support it, right? And that's just, some people would say, oh, yeah, we want a resistance, but we don't want to rely on Iran. Okay, great. Who do you want to rely on? You can't make your own weapons. So you need someone to supply you with weapons. The US is not going to supply you with weapons. The US won't supply the Lebanese military with weapons, strong enough to defend the country. So Iran is there. There's ideologically, Iran is also believes that U.S. empire should not have a space in the region, and does not believe that Israel plays a positive role in the region, and that is an ideological commitment of the Iranian government. And so that is an alliance, ideological, interest-based, there with a long-term view to establish sovereignty in a way that we saw in the last few months. Iranian sovereignty kicked the region's ass, basically, right? Like they make their own weapons, they're able to stand up to the US despite the sacrifices and the material destruction. And on the other side, you have, as Muhammad said, vassal states from, I mean, I don't, vassal states all over the world, literally, right? So all over the Arab
Even
Muslim
Canada, how would you consider Canada within the US
world.
alliance system?
I don't want to get into your internal politics, Jeremy.
Canadians are pretty proud of their
You guys
independence.
can you guys can discuss that after.
Sammy, we could talk to you for a lot longer, but we're out of time. Thank you so
And
much for this conversation.
you're
We really
welcome.
appreciate all your insight. And that was our interview with Sammy. I thought it was great. I learned a lot. I really liked how he explained how people should understand the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran, Hezbollah and the government, and some of those dynamics. And I really appreciated his point about how, we have a new version of a ceasefire now dominant in international relations thanks to Israel, where you put language into the ceasefire that allows you to break it without being considered that you have broken it. And this is just another dangerous precedent being set here.
Yes, thanks for Sami for joining us, and thanks for joining us on Deciphered. We're going to look next episode at what's taking place in Iran within this whole discussion we had, right? That part of the reason, one of the main reasons for going to war with Iran, besides nuclear weapons, Mohammed, was to save the people from their own government, right? So let's find out from experts on the topic what's actually going on in Iran, and would it be justified militarily to invade Iran now that we can see it actually hasn't worked?